Your Bibles open, please, at Isaiah 58, as we continue our studies. As we're beginning the last 9-chapter section of Isaiah, and although we often rightly highlight the structures and the divisions in passages of Scripture, we mustn't make these things so hard and fast that we miss or overlook some of the clear connections or the themes that transcend and cross over these structural divisions. And as Isaiah begins this new and last short section of the book, he continues actually the theme with which he ended the last section. You remember that over the last couple of studies, Isaiah has been pointing out to us the failings of the covenant people of God. If you go back a page or two in your Bible, the end of 56, the last few verses of chapter 56, into the first 2 of 57, he was commenting on the spiritual leaders, pointing out their failings. They were ignorant and idle and indulgent and insensitive. And then he turned his sight, as it were, on the people as a whole from 57:3 through to the end of 57. We looked at, I think, last week. And he saw that they were arrogantly adulterous. They were combining their worship of Yahweh with all the repugnant abomination practices of the people around them. They weren't replacing Yahweh, they were adding to their worship of Yahweh, the worship of the nations. Now he takes that theme a little bit further as we come into chapter 58, and he calls on God's people not to repent of their idolatry or their spiritual adultery, but their very practice of the worship of Yahweh. Of the way they're doing the very things that God has told them to do, and which they are doing. See, what Isaiah is telling us this morning, my friends, is this: the area in which sin so often manifests itself most clearly is in our religious practices. It's in the way that we worship. It's in the way that we practice our faith. Isaiah this morning is not looking at the liberals and the heretics and the apostates. He's not looking at the syncretists, those who are adding paganism and Baalism or whatever other form it might take onto the worship of Yahweh. He's speaking to the church. He's speaking to those who are repulsed by those things we thought about in the last couple of studies. He's thinking about those who would never go there. He's speaking about those who come to church regularly on a Sunday, who come to the prayer meeting regularly on a Sunday, who in their own homes regularly read the Word of God and pray. That's who he's speaking at this morning. And friends, some of our greatest crimes as Christians lies in our worship and in our Christian activity. This morning Isaiah is looking deep into our hearts. It's more comfortable, Sunday, isn't it, when Isaiah is speaking to them. But this morning, Isaiah is speaking to us. Let's look at the problem that Isaiah confronts among the people of his day. He's contrasting what I want to call rebellious worship and righteous worship. Now, I'm using the word rebellious carefully because it actually is a word that, certainly a concept that Isaiah uses here. You notice in verse 2, for example, he says, They forsake the judgment of their God. He puts it in negative tense for a reason I'll show you in a moment. They forsake the judgment of God. He speaks in verse 1 about their transgression. It's rebellious worship. And then he's going to go on and talk about righteous worship. For rebellious, you might want to use the word that I began with thinking about in my own head, was ritualistic worship, just going through the motions. But Isaiah said it's more than just that. It's ritualistic, that is deliberately rebellious. And so he begins this passage by this great cry in verse 1. Cry aloud, God says to Isaiah, cry aloud, do not hold back, lift up your voice like a trumpet, declare to my people their transgression, to the house of Jacob their sins. See, literally it says they cry out with the throat. So this is God speaking to his prophet. Lift your voice up, and from the deepest part of your being, get all the air you can possibly summon up, and bellow out is the idea of the preacher, the herald, the proclaimer of the Word of God. And you're to do it like a trumpet. And that's very important because among the people of God, the trumpet was very often used to expose danger, to warn people that the enemy is on the territory. And so Isaiah is saying to the prophet, be a prophet. And the job of the prophet is to warn. The job of the prophet is to expose. That's a contrast, isn't it, to the end of chapter 56, where you had that condemnation of the false teachers and the false prophets, who were blind leaders, blind watchmen, and like guard dogs that didn't bark. So here's the contrast. Here's the faithful prophet who doesn't keep his mouth shut, who's got his ear in tune with what God is saying. And God says to him, lift up your voice and cry with a loud voice and expose and declare to my people their transgressions. So as we go through this chapter, I want you to notice first of all that he talks a lot about fasting here. And then he talks a little bit from verse 13 about the Sabbath. But he's not really addressing the fasting and the Sabbath. He's using these as illustrations of the way they abuse worship. So when you see the word fast, for example, you can almost always substitute it here for the word worship, and you'll understand what Isaiah is talking about. He's not just talking about that one practice that is wrong. He's saying it exemplifies all that's wrong in their worship. See, this is not, as is often thought, primarily an instruction manual on how to fast or how not to fast, though there are lessons in this chapter for that. He's using the way that people are fasting and observing the Sabbath as illustrations of what's wrong with their religious observance and activity. And I find this quite interesting. As he talks about Sabbath in verse 13, he talks about fasting all the way through the chapter. But both these things were given to God's people as a means of grace. And what God's people have done with them, they've turned them into laws. It's also very interesting that he talks about all these fasts that they observe and how they observe it. Do you know in the Old Testament, I'm not going to ask you to answer this out loud, you might want to answer it in your head. How many fasts do you think were prescribed for the people of God? I'll tell you the answer. 1. On the Day of Atonement. It's the only one mandated, obligatory. Now all sorts of others came in through tradition and practice, and of course anybody could fast at any time, nothing wrong with that. But the only obligatory fast in the Old Testament was one day in the year. And what the people of God is, they've taken this one day in the year principle and they've made it a legalistic rod for their own backs. But also a way in which they could supersede the grace of God by showing God how super spiritual they are, because they don't just fast one day a year, they fast all the time. It's the same with the Sabbath observance. I told you a number of weeks ago, earlier on in Isaiah, there's the only biblical restriction in the Old Testament on the observance of the Sabbath was that it was a day holy to the Lord, and you express that holiness by not doing what you did 9 to 5 by gaining gainful employment during the week. And you know the Pharisees came up with volumes, literally multiple volumes of rules and regulations about what you couldn't do on the Sabbath. And they turned a means of grace into a means of law. That's what we do. And we do it because we want to supposedly tell God how devout we are, how pious we are. We take your laws and we multiply them and we expand them. And that's the problem that Isaiah is addressing in these verses. So let's see what God has to say about the worship of his people. First of all, God sees their worship. Look at verse 2. They seek me daily and delight to know my ways. They seek God daily. This is keen, this is assiduous. And the emphasis is very strong. The way the Hebrew is structured, in verse 2, it begins, me they seek daily. So this isn't the false worship of the previous chapter. This isn't them going to the idols and the prostitutes. This is them worshipping God. They're coming to church to worship God. Me they seek daily. They delight, verse 2, to know my ways. They ask God, verse 2, for just decisions. They delight in the nearness of God's presence. All of that is in verse 2. Down in verse 3, they humble themselves. The idea there is, when it says humble, it literally means they afflicted themselves, they suffer, they deprive themselves, as in a fast. So an observer looking on walking into the community of God's people in Isaiah, they say, these are enormously devout and pious people, because they're in church at every possible opportunity. They're always praying, they're always fasting, they're asking God for guidance and all the rest. These are the most amazingly devout, spiritual, pious people. They went to the temple, they obeyed God's laws, they fasted, they appeared eager to seek the Lord. But you know, two of the most important verses in this chapter come in verse 2. They seek me daily and delight to know my ways, as if. As if. God sees their worship, but he understands and he exposes their worship. All these people are doing is going through the motions. This religious fervour is actually a cloak. It's a veneer for their sin. Oh, yes, they fast, but look at verse 5. Is such the fast that I choose? A day for a person to humble or afflict themselves? Is it to bow down his head like a reed? The idea of that is it's mechanical, it's automatic. It's like a reed growing and a breeze blows it automatically. It's got no choice in it. It's mechanical. To spread sackcloth and ashes under, to make a big show of it. Is that the sort of fast I've chosen? Remember the Pharisees in Jesus' day? They would go around there. There are special sort of make-up places where you went to look as gaunt and as suffering as you possibly could, to tell everybody what a great spiritual person I am. Is that the sort of fast and worship I approve of, says God? And they go through all of this, and they're troubled, verse 3, because God doesn't seem to take any notice. That's offensive, isn't it? Look, God, look what I'm doing for you. Look how often I'm in church. Look how often I sacrifice. Look how often I experience hardship. Look how often I go without food and all these other things. God, but you don't seem to take a blind bit of notice. God, why aren't you delivering? And more than that, the outward result of their religious observance, you see, all of this religious observance should make them much more godly and spiritual and kind-hearted and gentle and Christ-like. But look at the sort of outward activity that follows from all this religious observance. Verse 4, you fast only to quarrel and to fight and to hit with a wicked fist. Verse 9, the end of verse 9, if you take away the yoke from your midst, the pointing of the finger and speaking wickedness. The idea there is of insulting gestures, malicious gossip. So these people are going through all these motions and going to these great lengths of religious observance and practice. The result is they're irritable, they're violent, they're gossipers, they're rumour mongers. Albert Matthias says their fasts always end in a fight. And immediately that should sound warning alarm, shouldn't it? If that's what happens because of all my religious observance, there's something wrong with all my religious observance. I was reading a story this week that in Jerusalem, in Holy Week of each year, there's the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And it's quite traditional here that each year the people, in preparation for a great procession, fast all week to prepare themselves. And on this particular day, processions from each branch of Christendom, led by the priests in all their glittering and costly garments, they jostle and fight with one another to get the pride of place. They spend all week fasting and preparing, supposedly to show their devotion to God, and then when they come together, they're fighting with one another to get the most prominent place in this procession, and often, quote, become a full-scale riot with golden crucifixes and shepherd's crooks being used as battle axes. That's worship for you. That's religious devotion for you. So God sees their worship and God exposes their worship, and then God reveals their motives. What's wrong with all this? Well, here's the key, verse 3. Behold, halfway through the verse, behold, in the day of your fast, you seek your own pleasure. Down in verse 13, if you turn back your foot from the Sabbath from doing your pleasure on my holy day. If you honor it, not going your own ways or seeking your own pleasure. See, here's the problem. Fasting, worship in general, had become an opportunity for self-pleasing, an opportunity for self-satisfaction, to the disadvantage of everybody else. And this ritualistic, rebellious worship had aroused the worst elements in human nature. And it brought no spiritual results because it didn't go beyond the mere formal act. See, the fasting, which was supposed to be an opportunity to deny oneself in order to concentrate on God, fasting had become an opportunity actually for self-indulgence rather than for worship. An act of mercy and kindness. The Sabbath, the day given over to God to stand back from your normal daily grind of earning your own keep, that had become a day, instead of a day for opportunity for acts of mercy and kindness, had become a day to oppress other people and take advantage of them. And now if you challenge them, because they say, no, we're doing exactly what God told us to do. We're fasting, we're going to the temple, we're praying, we're giving all our money. But God, who sees the heart, knows that the only reason they're really doing it is to make themselves feel good. And to try somehow manipulate God and almost twist his arm by being over-zealous and pious. Matthew Henry says, the Sabbath was made a day of rest, so that it might be a day of holy work. It's an interesting thought, isn't it? These people are using it for their own advantage rather than using it for the glory of God and the good of other people. Because let me keep saying, it's not fasting per se, the Sabbath per se, it's worship, it's religious observance. So God sees their worship, he exposes their worship, he reveals their motive, and then he corrects their thinking. He corrects their thinking. Here's the real idea of worship from verse 6 onwards. Is this not the fast that I choose? And he outlines the sort of worship he's looking for and the effects it will have. Now before we look at this, I want you to notice something very striking here. We always think of worship in vertical terms. We always think of worship as something vertical, whether it's not our technology or our electricity, suppose the promise. Just the undertakers underneath, okay? Well, that work, but anyway. We always think of worship as something that's vertical. But God says no. Worship is two-dimensional. Worship is horizontal as well as vertical. And if our vertical worship doesn't affect our horizontal life and relationships, then our vertical worship is faulty. Indeed, worship that is only vertical is rebellious worship. It's bogus worship. The righteous objectives of a fast day or of the Sabbath or any other element of worship you might have, says Isaiah, in the inspiration of God, are the following. Look at what he says. These are quite astonishing, aren't they? Verse 6. First of all, we're to free the exploited. We're to loose the bonds of wickedness. We're to undo the straps of the yoke. We're to let the oppressed go free and break every yoke. We are as Christians to work against every structure which diminishes the liberty of others. We're to work against that which oppresses people. We're to eliminate every way in which people are treated like animals and chattels. We're to release those who are broken by life. That's worship. Then he says, verse 7, we're to feed the hungry. Share your bread with the hungry. We're to house the homeless, verse 7. And not just pay somebody to take them in, but if need be, bring the homeless poor into your house. Verse 4, we're to clothe the naked. So that's verse 7. Clothe the naked. Verse 5, be sympathetic. So again, that's the end of verse 7. Don't hide yourself from your own flesh. Now that doesn't mean your own flesh and blood in the sense we use that in English language today, your immediate family. It means humanity, flesh and blood. Those people who are oppressed, those people who are marginalized, those people who are naked and homeless and all the rest of it. They're humans just like yourself, created in the image of God. How can you come to church on a Sunday and extol the goodness of God and preach the good news of the gospel and then turn a blind eye to human suffering? Worship is not just vertical. Indeed, true vertical worship will always have a horizontal consequence, an outworking. And also, true worship means that we won't be malicious. We touched on that already in verse 9. We won't gossip. We won't rumour monger. We won't point the finger at people. See, what's going on in Isaiah's day is this: there were people who were fasting and denying themselves food, and they were saving themselves some money into the bargain, and they had more time on their hands, and so they used that time and their money to enrich themselves and oppress others and enslave others, take advantage of others. They would make a big show of going to the temple and a big show of fasting or whatever else it may be, but they would ignore the homeless man in the street. They'd be like the characters in the story of the Good Samaritan, and the priest and the Levite who'd go on their way to carry out their religious duties, but they're so concerned about carrying out their religious duties, they'll walk on the other side of the road for a man whose life is in danger. And God says that's vertical worship. That has no horizontal consequence, and therefore it's bogus worship. It's not pleasing to me. And in fact, he actually says in verse 4, worship or fasting like yours this day, fasting and worship that ignore this horizontal element, will not make your voice to be heard on high. I don't hear you. I don't hear you. That's strong words, isn't it? Friends, what's the 21st century? What's the equivalent of all of this in the New Testament dispensation? Well, it's simply this: it means that we go to church and we pray and we go through all the religious activities, all of which are good and all of which God has prescribed and encouraged, but we do it for our own agenda, for our own satisfaction, for our own fulfillment. We're not doing it to give to God, we're doing it to get from God. We're doing it to twist God's arm. We're treating God like some sort of ATM machine where if we do certain things, God will always deliver. And we're so offended and so annoyed when He doesn't. And worship has become very vertical but no horizontal. So we're so concerned about being pious and religious and keeping up a good appearance before God, but there's no concern in our hearts for all these people God is talking about, the underprivileged and the needy and the homeless and the oppressed. And the only reason we come to church, the only reason we pray, the only reason we go through our religious activity is because it makes us feel better. And we do it because we're concerned about what others will think if we don't do it. We don't do it to give to God. We don't do it to bless God's heart. We do it so God would bless us. So in this sort of rebellious, ritualistic, bogus worship, people are in effect trying to buy God's blessing by their religious activity. And we look on in horror as evangelical, committed Christians when people in other branches of the visible church do that, don't they? Some of you have been there, some of you have seen this, some of you have been involved in that before you were converted. You've been to that sort of church where there's a statue and if you put some money in the box and hear it hit the bottom of the box, you know that you expect that God is going to bless you. You've been to those statues and the toes of the bottom are worn out with people kissing it for generations because they think that if they do that, God will bless them. We look with scorn on that. And yet Isaiah says in our hearts, there's the seed of the potential of doing exactly the same thing in our evangelical ways of worship, by just going through the motions, and actually what we're doing is we're twisting God's arm. Bless us, not may we bless you. See, worshipping God involves more than observing an outward ritual. There has to be inward obedience. There has to be a heart submission to the Lord. These two examples that Isaiah uses, remember it's worship as a whole, but these two particular examples, fasting and the Lord's Day, are intended to give us an opportunity to abandon our own needs to God. God, I trust you to provide for me. But also to give ourselves away. Not only in the service of God, but in the service of others. Paul in Romans 2, you might just want to turn with me for a moment to Romans chapter 2. Paul has a similar idea in mind here. He's speaking to these devout, self-righteous Jews who think that because they're Jews, because they have the law, that they're okay. And Paul says to them in Romans chapter 2 and in verse 17, if you call yourself a Jew and rely on the law and boast in God, and know his will and approve what is excellent, because you are instructed from the law, and if you are sure that you yourself are a guide to the blind, a light to those who are in darkness, an instructor of the foolish, a teacher of children, having in the law the embodiment of knowledge and truth, you then who teach others, do you not teach yourself? While you preach against stealing, do you steal? You say that one must not commit adultery, do you commit adultery? You who abhor idols, do you rob temples? You who boast in the law, dishonor God by breaking the law. See, here's the problem. Here, we can be as self-righteous as anybody in the world, folks. But our everyday life doesn't match up to our profession. I read an article this week by an American Christian commentator called Jonathan Lehman. And he says this, he wrote this in a recent article in an American newspaper. Quote, Paul asked the Jews of his day, you who preach against stealing, do you steal? He says, I've got a few questions of my own. You who call for immigration reform, do you practice hospitality with strangers? You who vote for family values, do you honor your parents and love your spouse self-sacrificially? You who talk about welfare reform, do you give to the needy in your congregation? You who proclaim that all lives matter, who are your friends? Do they all look like you? You who rightly lament structural injustices, do you work against them in your own congregation? Do you rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep? You who fight for traditional marriage, do you submit to your husband or love your wife, cherishing her as you would your own body and washing her with the water of the word? You who are concerned about the economy and the job market, do you obey your boss with a sincere heart, not as a people pleaser, but as you would obey Christ? You who opine on social media, do you gladly share the Lord's Supper with a church member who disagrees? Do you pray for their spiritual good? It's all telling stuff, isn't it? It's easy to pontificate. The issue is, what's it like in real life? Some of you will know, of course, Norman Mackay from Govan, who's preached here a couple of times, doing some amazing work in a very run-down part of Glasgow as he's planted Govan Free Church. And I remember him telling me a little while ago they were having a Bible study and a prayer meeting. And I don't remember the mechanics, but as they were having a Bible study and prayer meeting, they got news that a woman in the community was in desperate need of some very practical help. So they immediately shut their Bibles and they stopped praying. And they spent the next few hours helping that woman in a practical need. Isaiah would have approved. Isaiah would have approved. See, here's the problem that Isaiah is getting at here, my friends. This is, in effect, worship that indulges self and not God. It's worship that is seeking a blessing rather than giving a blessing to God. It's worship that is so vertical and so pious that it ignores the needy and the broken world and all the people around us. And Isaiah says that worship is not pleasing to God. So what sort of worship is pleasing to God? Well, look at the blessings that God promises that flow from righteous worship. If we do these things for the right reasons and with the right heart, what can we expect? So look at what God says. Look at verse 8. Then, and the language here in the Hebrew is very, very strong. It's an emphatic, what's called an emphatic particle of time. You could almost say only then. If you do these things, if you loose the bonds of wickedness and undo the straps of the yoke, and let the oppressed go free, and break every yoke, and share your bread with the hungry, and bring the homeless into your house, and see and cover the nakedness of the stranger, and don't ignore your own flesh and blood, then, only then, will these things happen. As 8 blessings that flow from righteous worship. Let me point them out to you very quickly, they're fairly self-evident. Number 1, in verse 8, you have a new beginning to life. Fresh beginnings like a new dawn. Your light will break forth like the dawn. A new lease of life is envisaged. Then it'll break forth as flood waters erupting. Number 2, in verse 8, there will be personal restoration and spiritual healing. Your healing shall spring up speedily. The word used for healing here is the idea of new flesh covering where a wound exists just now. And instead of a festering wound that you can't get rid of, God will give new flesh and healing in your spiritual life. Number 3, verse 8, there'll be security. Your righteousness shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Front and back. You will be secure because you know that you are counted as truly righteous. Not because you're doing the right things, because doing the right things doesn't make you righteous, but you're doing the right things because you're righteous. It's evidence that you're righteous. If you do all these things, feed the hungry, house the homeless, and clothe the naked, that's the evidence that you are righteous. And you have the protection of God because the glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. To put it in clover terms, He's got your back covered. You can get out there and you can make yourself vulnerable and you can expose yourself, if you like, to the needs of other people and help them. And you don't need to worry whatever will happen to you, what anybody will say about you, because God's got your back covered. Number 4, verse 9. You will have fellowship with the Lord, real fellowship with the Lord. You shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry, and He will say, here I am. Do you remember the contrast back in verse 3? Why have we fasted and you see it not? Fasting like yours, verse 4, will not make your voice to be heard on high. What a contrast now. God hears. More than that, God comes to us. Notice what He says, here I am. I ask God for a blessing. God doesn't just give me a blessing, He gives me Himself. Here I am. Alec Mattia, in his wonderful commentary, says, answered prayer is not like God sending a food parcel. It's like a home visit by the doctor. Is that a lovely picture? God just doesn't dispatch a blessing, He comes with the blessing. Here's the 5th blessing of righteous worship. Verses 10 and 11, guidance. If you pour yourself out for the hungry and satisfy the desire of the afflicted, then, only then, shall your light rise in the darkness and your gloom be as the noonday. The Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your desire in scorched places. Instead of perplexity and bewilderment, there'll be clarity and direction and guidance at every step. If you worship by this and serve the Lord by this, you will hear a voice saying, this is the way, walk in it. Number 6, there'll be refreshment, verse 11. You'll be like a watered garden, like a spring of water, whose waters do not fail. Doesn't matter how bleak your circumstances may be, doesn't matter how parched the ground may feel that you're in, you will be refreshed. There'll be an unfailing spring of water. You will know spiritual satisfaction. You may be expending all your energy and all your emotions on the things of God and serving God and housing the homeless and feeding the hungry. But God will refresh you all the time because you're doing what pleases Him. You're serving. And then number 7 in verse 12, there'll be rebuilding. Your ancient ruins shall be rebuilt. You shall raise up the foundations of many generations. You shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of streets to dwell in. You will have continued blessings that will count for the future. Generations to come. You will have a lasting spiritual legacy and influence. And then number 8, verse 14, you will have increased spiritual joy. See, if you call the Sabbath a delight, as an example of worship, if you delight in the things of God, verse 14, then you shall take delight in the Lord. If you put God first and not yourself, if you put others first and not yourself, then God will give you spiritual joy and delight. And the language there is of covenant blessings. You see what Isaiah is trying to tell us here this morning? This is counterintuitive. The false worshippers, the rebellious worshippers, think I will get more out of it if I worship God in this mechanical, ritualistic way. And Isaiah says, no, you will get more out of it if you give God more to start with. if your heart is right, if your priorities are right. If you go into this looking for what God's going to give you, you'll get nothing. If you go into it thinking, what can God give me? God will bless you. See, God doesn't bless us as a reward. We're not to do these good things in order that God will bless us. He's simply saying that this is the consequence of serving God and worshiping Him in the right way. But I find these 8 blessings that I've challenged myself about them over these past days. I've been looking at this. I want to encourage you to take stock of your spiritual life. Take stock of your worship. Take stock of your, quote, religious activity. Are any or some or all of these blessings missing from your life? Maybe as I went through that list, you were thinking, oh, if only. If only. Well, here's the challenge. Maybe they're missing because our worship is bad. Maybe they're missing because our religious activity is wrong. It's actually rebellious. It's not righteous. See, when we worship because it's the popular thing to do, not because it's the right thing to do, when we worship with an eye on our hearts, not on God's heart, then our worship becomes bogus and hypocritical and rebellious. If in my so-called religious Christian worship duties, I'm actually doing what pleases me, and if it doesn't result in making me a better person, if it doesn't make me more Christ-like, then actually I'm wasting my time. And my worship, listen, my worship is sinful. My worship is sinful. If you really want to offend a religious person, don't talk about their morality, talk about the way they worship. Fasting and fighting don't go together. See, let's take fasting just very briefly as an example, a specific example. I told it's illustrative, but let's take this example. The main reason for fasting is not to lose weight. The main reason for fasting is not to feel good about yourself. Oh, I've got through 2 weeks or whatever it might be. I haven't eaten chocolate for 6 days. Whatever it may be. The point of fasting is to have more time to focus on God. It's to say to God, God, I need you more than I need that. And by the way, fasting is not all about food in the Bible either. It's depriving us of anything that's legitimate. And we're depriving ourselves because we're saying to God, God, I need you more than I need that. And I've got more time now to focus on you. But listen, not only to focus on you, but to see what good I can do in this world in which I live. So if we fast or Sabbath observe or worship in any area in order to get something for ourselves from God, instead of giving to God and as a result becoming better people, then we've missed the whole point of worship to start with. The essence of bogus religion is doing as one pleases for one's own self-satisfaction. Whereas the mark of real religion, righteous worship, is from the heart, it's practical, it's horizontal, and it brings real blessings. Friends, there's no point in fasting, or in observing a strict Sabbath, or performing any religious or spiritual activity and expect to win God's favor by doing so, if at the same time we are guilty of injustice, or oppression, or greed, or insensitivity to the needs of others. If we're guilty of an absence of love, or pointing the finger, or gossiping, or rumour mongering, or malicious talk, we'd just better not come to church. One writer puts it this way: the essence of Christianity is love for Christ. That's the power of it, that's the genius of it. And authentic Christianity expresses that heart for Christ in basically 2 ways. First, in worship and praise and prayer and lifted hands and open Bibles, all beautiful to God. But secondly, also in courageous evangelism and defending the weak and feeding the hungry. And the point that Isaiah would say to us this morning is, it's not either or. It's both and. It's both and. Derek Thomas, the great pastor and preacher and commentator, he says this as he talks about this passage. Of course, Isaiah is concerned about the purity of the gospel. It is vital that the message of salvation be proclaimed clearly and without compromise. But it is also vital that the evidence of the gospel be visible in our lives, that we become Jesus-like. And the shape of Jesus' likeness is identified with a passionate concern for human need. Friends, we might not approve of what we sometimes call the social gospel, which is really social concern without the gospel. But we can very quickly and easily fall into the opposite and equally wrong trap. A gospel that is not social in its effect and impact is not a true gospel. There is such a thing as a true social gospel. It's the gospel that impacts society. Social concern is not a means to an end. Isaiah would tell us that social concern is an end in itself. It is God glorified. It is for the believer an act of worship as we express the love of Christ to those who are in need, whatever form that need might take. Social concern on the part of the believer is actually an act of worship. It's a hallmark of worship that pleases the Father's heart. So the question we need to ask ourselves is my worship to God, whatever form it may take, whatever part of the Christian activity I'm thinking about or involved in, is my worship actually rebellious because I'm looking for something for myself? Or is my worship righteous because I'm seeking to glorify and honour God, and in the name of God, seeking to bring mercy to those who are in need? It's not either or. It's both and. Let's pray. Well, this is quite a tough subject for us this morning, because it does go something against the grain not only of our human nature, but at times even of our evangelical culture and our thinking, where we can, if we're not careful, get ourselves into a sort of Christian ghetto that is somewhat cut off from and parallel to the real world outside us. But you tell us, what do you require of us? You require us to love justice and do mercy. Isaiah has told us this morning under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit that the true worshipper who worships God in spirit and in truth and with all their heart will also be the one who uses every opportunity and every God-given grace and resource to meet people at their deepest point of need. Father, we ask for wisdom, we ask for balance, we ask for faithfulness in all these things. We ask that as individuals, but also as a community of believers in this place, you will give us wonderful, glorious opportunities to put this into practice. And we ask that you'll keep us from all those defective attitudes that we've touched on this morning, so that our worship is not self-seeking or self-centered or self-serving. Our worship is God-honoring and society impacting as we bring the glorious love of Christ to bear in broken homes and lives. Hear our prayer. Help us to work this all out for ourselves. Help us to work out what it means for us as individuals. Help us to work out what it means for us as a fellowship of your people. Because we want, Lord, we tell you unashamedly, we want these blessings. We want these blessings. We want you to refresh us and renew us and revive us and secure us and guide us and all these other things. And we want our worship to bless you and to please you, whatever form that worship takes. And we ask all of this in the wonderful name of Jesus, our Saviour.